sending people with guns.
I didn't realize I was so captivating.
How are you guys so deep into my content?
Everyone who disagrees with me is a Nazi.
G'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis podcast, where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. My name is Pietro, and I am without Max today. Unfortunately, Max couldn't make it, but I do have a stellar guest to take his place. So our guest today has worn a number of different hats over the course of his life, and probably I'm leaving out a whole bunch which he can fill us in a moment. But he's been to my knowledge, he's been a skydiving instructor, he's been a truck driver, he's been a local councillor, he's been a federal and state candidate here in Australia, here in Victoria. And most recently, he's also the current federal president of the Liberal Democrats, which are, of course, the Libertarian Party here in Australia. So many hats, and I'm sure he'll correct me and add some more hats to that list. But I'll, without further ado, welcome our very esteemed guest today, Mr. Paul Barker. How are you, Paul?
Good morning, Pietro. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Better now you're here.
Thank you.
Did I leave any out? Did I leave any? I'm sure I left some out.
Yeah, you only forgot the 7 years military, domestic and overseas deployments. Most people don't know I was a car detailer firsthand, delivered pamphlets for money, and now I deliver pamphlets for free. Run my own transport company, delivering motorcycles around Australia. Been trivia host, handyman, gardener. Try my hand at most things.
Well, that's good. If anyone can wrangle this country out of the statist hellhole that it's going to, it's a jack of all trades. Hopefully, that's my hope anyway. My first question was, I suppose, given that you've had all these, and some of them are more common than others, but some are some extraordinary career choices. A skydiving instructor, for example, puts you in a very, very, very low percentile of people. Are there any of these, also, obviously being in the military, are there any transferable skills between any of these things that you've done and your current, I suppose, extremely difficult task of wrangling together a whole group of stubborn, stern, ardent, individualist libertarians?
Absolutely. I think just about everything, like whether it's the car detailing, getting up at stupid hours, dealing with challenging environments there. I think the military helps significantly, more so in the wrangling at the AGM, getting a whole bunch of people that want to do their own thing all on the same page. Run the business, understanding the concerns of business owners and the fact that they wear just about every hat in terms of HR, PR, cleaning, strategy, the works. I think it's actually all come together. And in terms of politics, what our party is a collection of individuals that are kicking goals in the private sector. And I think that is going to be one of our core strengths that define us significantly differently to other political parties that are filled with political staffers and people without real world experience, that it's not going to take long for Australians to realise that we are the party of the people, because we are full of such a diverse group of people, and have the will and tenacity to get us out of this economic insanity that we're diving into head first.
Yeah, that's an angle I hadn't necessarily thought of when it comes to how well a political party runs, is that just by virtue of the philosophy that we adhere to, like free market, small business, all of that, people who are attracted to our worldview are generally just more competent people who are upset with the unfair, top-down government rulings and regulations and, quotas and all the rest of it. And so just by virtue of that, we just happen to have more competent people. We also have more people who want to do it all themselves because that's the way that they are used to running things. But yeah, no, I hadn't considered that angle, because whereas the other parties vouch for and advocate for kind of a parasitic existence for people and for the state, and so I don't know that they'd be all that useful when you get them all together in one place.
No, but I think they work well, and history has proven that there's a significant cohort of the population that just go with status quo. They vote who their parents voted for. And as a result, the major parties don't really need to make much effort to get a 30-40% primary vote. Whereas for us, we're in a challenging space because what we sell is going to be better for society long term. But some people might struggle with some of our policies in the short term.
Yeah, there's no easy short-term sugar hit that we can sell people, unfortunately. As libertarians, it is that long-term view. But before we get into all the weeds of major parties, minor parties, and the Liberal Democrats, who have some exciting news, which we're going to bring today. Tell me more about yourself, Paul, and tell our viewers more about yourself. So, how did you come about the philosophy? How did your entry into this world begin, and how did you get where you are now?
Okay, so most people, well, not most, but there's a fair few people that understand my entry. There was a bit of a baptism of fire in 2014. Went through some relationship issues with my wife, as a lot of people have challenges. Those challenges resulted in a path being taken by my ex that resulted in limited contact that turned into sustained reduction, well, a cessation of contact between our son and myself. And that got me a little bit politically active, quite angry at the start. I then got politically aware, found this gentleman by the name of David Leinhelm, who was talking a lot of sense, and that just started the journey. And what it really highlighted to me is that everyone, absolutely everyone, you, me, every viewer, even every politician, is being negatively impacted by the state in some way, shape, or form. And it's only when an individual experiences that impact to a degree that hits them emotionally is when they'll actually start to think about it. And fortunately, there's a lot of people that haven't had that visceral response to that government interference. But I think as time goes on and the cost of living hits more and more people start to question, then we'll go from there. But yeah, my entry into Libertarian was a bit of a baptism of fire. Then got into Tom Sowell, Milton Friedman, all the rest. And once you start piecing together the million-piece puzzle that goes into the philosophy of libertarianism, you start to see a bit of a picture of the way society can head. And I think it's the only rational, logical step that we take to live a more libertarian lifestyle and govern ourselves in a way that fits libertarian principles to get us out of this mess.
Yeah, no, and fair enough. And I suppose that's kind of like one of the paradoxes of libertarianism is that we exist in we are aware of this philosophy, which, if enacted, could improve the lot of just about everyone in life, including the people who disagree with us. But we live in a world which is completely the opposite of that. And it's very easy to say that point B is better than point A. And it's abundantly evident to anyone who takes the time to genuinely, rigorously sort of look at the position of point B and what it would mean and how it would work and all the rest of it. But we are still at point A. And getting from point A to point B is an infinitely difficult question, so much more infinitely difficult than how point B would actually work, and whether it would work, which is, as far as we're concerned, apparent and obvious that it's the best way that, individual freedom and free markets and letting people govern over their own lives and minimizing the state would, unequivocally produce a better world. But we cannot get to that, and how we get to that is the questions that we wrangle with every day.
Yes.
And I mean, I don't know. Do you? It's a huge question to lay on you this early in the interview. I was actually going to sort of go towards the end with this as a broader sort of philosophical question, but we're on the topic now. So, what do you see as a possible path, given your position of prominence within the Libertarian Party? What is the path towards getting from the point A that we're at a little bit closer to point B, do you think?
Well, I think this harks back to my military and skydive instructor role, where when you're teaching someone or trying to impart a new skill onto someone, you need to be able to talk in their language. And one of the issues that I've seen within the libertarian movement is that due to the nature of most individuals in the libertarian movement, the passion and assumed knowledge that we all come with, often when we engage with the general public through elections or other engagement, I think we can be delivering too much too soon. And I think our main benefit to a quick growth in support will result from us speaking the language of the people that we're engaging with. So it might be a situation where we want to talk about all our great policies, which will shape the country into a much more free and prosperous society. But it might be something such as simple as looking at fuel excise tax. People are frustrated that filling up costs so much. And if we can highlight how there's one easy fix, well, we would say easy. The bottom line of the federal budget might think differently, but that's a trade-off that we are willing to accept to create a more challenging fiscal position for the state, with the trade-off for that being that individuals don't have to pay so much for fuel.
Yeah, well, you mentioned before Thomas Sowell. I'm pretty sure it's a famous Thomas Sowell quote that there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I don't know, that trade-off, the state having less money at its disposal to waste and individuals having more money at their disposal because they don't pay as much in, something as simple as the fuel excise tax, does sound a lot more like a solution to me than a trade-off. But I suppose you would have to call it a trade-off based on those technically on those parameters, but it sounds pretty damn good to me.
Yes.
So simplifying the message is something that you think is important.
Yeah. And it'll have a visceral response in most libertarians, I think, and even within myself, because I know there's a whole multitude of interconnected policies and philosophies that are essential. But for the average person's attention span, we don't have that time to invest into all of that. So, yeah, definitely simplification in message.
Yeah, well, I mean, and short term, you could get some success there. Like you could get some, I don't know, I don't even dare to guess what kind of percentage of the population might maybe jump to our cause. A problem I see with that is that it would be a lot of people jumping towards our cause on a single issue who don't understand the broader philosophy, and they would it would be difficult then to using that as a first step to take a second step, because at a certain point you kind of need people to buy in and understand all the way. And at a certain point, in the democratic system that we have, which rewards the fanfare of promising things at election time, it's just so hard to compete with free stuff. It's just selling ideas and trying to compete with free stuff is just such a difficult grind of a battle. Which, yeah, that's something that I see as kind of a very difficult task to cross the threshold of.
Yeah, well, but this is another opportunity, because I actually look at every frustration as an opportunity. If someone's ever frustrated or angry, that means that there's an opportunity for improvement. So with the free stuff argument, what we're looking at now is at the last federal election, Labor took to, as one of their policies to the election, cheaper childcare. But what that really means is that you, me, the viewers, and every single man, woman, and child in Australia over the next 4 years will have their tax bill increased by $2,000 to fund this cheaper childcare, in inverted commas, which is simply just subsidies.
Yeah, and if they don't increase the taxes, they're increasing the money supply anyway. So we pay
money
through
supply or debt, either way, we're going to get hit.
Yes, either way, that nothing in life is free, unfortunately. Yeah. Which, yes, I mean, obviously that's if we could get everyone to understand that simple fact, which, I mean, anyone who is in charge of legislating knows, like they're all aware of the reasons and the causes, but the incentives for government, the incentives for being involved in the state apparatus are to try and get in, take as much as you can, win as much as you can, make as many power moves and connect yourself and your friends and your party as you can in the short amount of time that you can. And then because you'll get booted out the second that you start trying to look at something a little bit more long-term. And I think that's something we're seeing everywhere in the world, unfortunately, especially with the advent of central banks making the power of printing money virtually without a political cost. Yeah, but that's just, I suppose, a somber look at what we're doing. But if you could just get people to understand those simple facts, the truth is on our side. It's just a painful realization upon becoming a libertarian that unfortunately the truth's been on our side for hundreds of years, and it hasn't necessarily meant winning.
I'd even challenge that and go thousands of years. If you look into the history of libertarian philosophy, you've got all these little bits and pieces, and we're going back as far as a few thousand years BC with the Sumerians. And yeah, the problem is that the truth hurts sometimes, and a lot of people are willing to avoid that hurt, which avoids the truth, which just causes a worse outcome long term.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're in agreement on the uphill battle that we certainly have ahead of us, but we are, despite our pessimism, both very much invigorated and willing to fight this battle. And I would like to talk also about some lighter news as a segue. Not lighter, happier news is what I would consider. So put it this way, you know how every time we have an election, it's always described as, this is the most important election of our lifetimes. Like every election is the most important election of our lifetime because it's the one right now that the current people telling you that want to win, obviously. I've had so many most important elections of my lifetime that to last me 10 lifetimes, let's put it that way. But what I genuinely would consider to be, I'll even say the most important election of our lifetime, is one that thankfully we won. The good guys won in my opinion, and that was Liberal Democrats have for a long time had such a terribly confusing name. And if you follow the exact wording, the exact definitions, yes, it does apply to the philosophy of classical liberalism and the fact that we're trying to use democracy to enable classical liberalism. But the name is confusing and almost sounds like the opposite of what we believe. But there was an election at the recent AGM that you mentioned earlier where the party voted to change the name. So would you like to run? And the reason I say this is the most important election of our lifetimes is because we might win the next election, we might lose the one after, we might win the one after. There's always another election of that kind. But if the party didn't change the name to what I believe was the correct name, I don't think the party would have ever changed the name again. Yeah. So this was a everything was on the line with this one, and there were vehement arguments on both sides, and lots of people had a lot staked on different options. But would you like to run us through a little bit what happened at the Liberal Democrats National AGM? What was it, about a month ago now, I think?
Yeah. So on Saturday, 13th of May, the National Reform Committee proposed a bunch of constitutional reforms. But what most people were more concerned with was, as you hinted, the change in the name. So as a precursor to this, Labor and Liberal teamed up to essentially ban the name Liberal Democrats from the Australian political landscape. And that resulted in High Court challenge that we narrowly lost, with the most senior judges ruling in our favour. But that
which is the best thing that could have happened to us, mind you, because as far as I'm concerned, if we kept that name, we've just added another uphill battle to the list of uphill battles that we have.
Yeah. So it was definitely the catalyst for name change, and we briefly adopted Liberty and Democracy Party to get us through constitutionally, but I don't think there was a huge amount of support for that, which there wasn't. But end result was there were a number of names that National Executive put forward to the members to consider after going through a process where we got a whole bunch of recommendations from the members. End result is that every name proposed had a set of advantages and disadvantages, but the two lead contenders were Libertarian Party and Liberty Party, and there were strong arguments for both. But at the end of the day, overwhelming amount of support lent towards the Libertarian Party. That was then posed to the members as a constitutional change, which required a 75% vote of the members, and in excess of 80% voted for the name change to Libertarian Party. And as of Saturday, the 13th of May, we are now the Libertarian Party.
Which is fantastic. That is we've won the election of our lifetimes, I think, because I mean, I don't know. What were your thoughts on the name, and what are some of the benefits that come with the new name? I can think of some, certainly, but I'm sure you've got some thoughts on the matter as well.
Yeah. So as I hinted at before, each name had a certain set of pros and cons. What the Libertarian Party name enables is a clear line in the sand that if you have any question on where we are going to sit on a particular topic, if you look up libertarianism, find out what the key values are of that political philosophy, most people, if they spend a little bit of time, would be able to work out our position on just about any topic. So it'll give a degree of certainty to the voter, and it'll create a definite heading of where we are heading as a party, and give clarity to even the candidates and volunteers that there's no confusion in name with another political party that's imploding. We are clearly defined, and fortunately, I think this is a byproduct that no one really considered, but it gives us 5 syllables that aren't really able to be shortened unless you named us Lib, but that's going to be confused with another political party. So newsreaders, podcast hosts will all be forced, not that we like forcing people, but will be forced into a position where they are articulating 5 syllables with the addition of party if they so choose, to describe us. So it's going to make a lot of people who might not want to acknowledge us in a very clear and distinct way.
That I hadn't thought of. That's actually a really, that's so valuable, because I mean, obviously what the biggest problem that a libertarian party, not just us, but any libertarian party around the world faces is the fact that because the state opposes us like so vehemently, because we oppose the state, we're telling you that the state is a parasitic organization that is, obstructing on your individual freedom. They don't want,
the truth.
Which is the truth. They don't want to acknowledge us and give credence to that. So the easiest thing they can do is ignore, and that's always been the strategy, is to ignore, undermine, pretend that we are fringe and that we don't exist. And in a sense, like, if they acknowledged the fact that we were the Liberal Democrats and we were winning seats, to most people, the Liberal Democrats, well, that's just another party. Like, what does that mean? They sound like the Liberals, or they like it doesn't mean anything. Whereas, as you said, Libertarian, all it takes is a Google search. It's like Libertarian. Why have I been hearing that name all over the place? I keep hearing that name. What does it mean? Shit, now I can contend with their ideas, which is it's a huge benefit. The other benefit that and that's to me was the biggest gain that we could have from changing the name to Libertarian, because controversial as it may sound, I could not care less about the Libertarian Party as an entity. Like, I'm not here because the Libertarian Party is an organization which I love so much. I'm here because I love the idea of libertarianism, and the best vessel for that is, in the political realm at the very least, is the Libertarian Party. And so, I'm not looking to grow the party by calling it whatever name is marketable or whatever we can do to grab a whole bunch of people who don't even understand what they're voting for and mush them all together into this organization. I want to grow the ideas of libertarianism. I want to spread the ideas of libertarianism, and to have a political party which is now the fate of libertarianism as a philosophy in Australia is now inextricably tied with the fate of the party, because the more the party grows, the more people have to contend with the idea. Makes it so much easier to want to get involved and to want to grow the party itself.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
And I think we're going to get significant pushback from the major parties into the future, because they are bleeding members who are coming to us, because we have a very, very fortunate position that we have policies that will appeal to just about members of any other political organization. And what we also have is a very much maturing organization where historically there's been a bit of to and fro inside the party. But as time goes on, that's becoming less and less. And I think that maturity is going to appeal to a lot of people. Like, I've seen just in my local branch, we've had a number of Greens, Labor and Liberal former members come through with some glowing reports of who we are, how we function. So I think as long as we can maintain a mature approach to how we continue to evolve, we'll continue to pick up the pieces that the major parties are losing. And as a result, like, I've got some pretty big hopes for our party in the future. There's no reason why we can't be a 30-40% primary vote in the next 30-40 years. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but as long as we can keep focusing on the long-term goal, the long-term strategy, and take the wins slowly but surely, others will fail and we will continue to succeed. And when we succeed, I think every Australian will benefit.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose this is almost a solution to the conundrum that we were grappling with earlier. The idea that what is the path towards having some sort of societal change when the state is so overbearing? But we also need to be careful not to understate the power that just having name recognition, being a big player in the media, in the news, in those sort of circles, can have on like just having your name repeated again and again and again and your name being distinctive is self-perpetuating. You know, a party that's been around 20 years and is constantly contesting elections and is constantly there and is constantly growing, is constantly campaigning, is constantly pushing the ideas with the fervor that we know libertarians have, because, you know, our ideas are animating and exciting, then eventually there is that potential to just find that gap in people's brains and you know, carve out a chunk of the population, which might be enough to make some sort of difference.
Exactly. And it also makes me think of some of the issues that have popped up within council. As you highlighted, I'm a Surf Coast Shire councillor. And what I've found really beneficial is that we've got some very abstract components to our philosophy that most people wouldn't instantly understand as a good thing. But what I've been able to do is articulate some of those principles or philosophies in very lay terms on issues that the community are currently facing, and am generating a reasonable degree of support within the community, because they're starting to see that there's a path that governments of every level are heading down, and it's not one that a lot of people agree with.
Could you give me an example of one of these?
So at the moment, there's a bit of a push within Surf Coast and other Victorian councils to comply with certain legislation in terms of inclusivity by allowing males in female toilets, females in male toilets. And it might sound like not a big issue.
Sorry, just to clarify, is this part of like the transgender rights stuff, or is this purely, or is this
where I
separate?
see it? That's where I see it evolving from. And I think
it's not explicitly that though. It's literally just saying anyone can go in whichever toilet, or is it specifically, you know, like someone who identifies as a woman can now go in?
It's like across the board.
Right.
And the problem with that is it's, as our Victorian MLC has highlighted, we've got an issue where there's a conflict of rights. So whenever you've got a situation where one person's right is going to be negatively impacted by another person's right, I think you need to take a second look at the situation and look at other more creative ways to deal with it. So with the toilet issue, I think what they're going down at the moment is a very simplistic way to address the concern, whereas what there might be an alternate way to manage it is that they rebadge some toilets as unisex or non-specific, and then that might create some sort of an option to cater to everyone's needs, where the path that's being taken at the moment is one that I think discounts the rights of some people in order to support a smaller minority.
Yeah, and you've been getting traction, you say, by talking on these issues within your community. Like there are.
So like anytime policy comes to council, there's always a draft and a public submission period, which gives me as a local councillor 3 minutes to talk to that in council meetings. And it's interesting because I represent essentially 11% of my local community as one of 9 councillors, and there is a significant cohort of councillors that I am on a totally different page compared to. And what I've found is that whether it's the toilet issue or a whole bunch of other, like we got a cat curfew, 24-hour cat curfew they enacted. Now, I don't know about you, but trying to contain cats to your property is near on impossible unless you lock them inside the house. And there's going to be a whole bunch of unintended consequences as a result of that. And I spoke against that strongly and have generated more support within the community based on that issue. and I think this is where I've got significant hope and optimism for the party long term, is where we can continue to get people elected into positions on every level of council and government. We will have that public platform to say our piece and generate support, and that support may very well turn into financial or voluntary or the whole bunch of other things that come up in state and federal elections that continue to give us more capability, more reach, and it's just going to be a snowball effect. That what I think is a bit terrible is that society is going to continue to get worse. We're going to have worse individual liberty and economic outcomes, but that's going to mean people hit their tipping point as when they speak up and get active. And yeah, so I don't want to see society worsen, but I think it will. But that'll just result in a better outcome for our movement more broadly long term. And how bad or how long the continued reduction in liberty and economic outcomes goes for is anyone's guess. But yeah, I'm just very optimistic that it's going to result in a better long term for all of us as our movement continues to grow and evolve.
I certainly share your hope. I have, well, let me push back. So I suppose the opposite view that I would have, and I hope you're correct, and obviously I don't know what the answer is, but what I would call that sort of viewpoint is the idea of, I think they're called like collapsitarians or like accelerationists. You know,
Yes.
like we welcome the collapse because it means that, you know, every day the worse it gets, the closer we are to the unsustainability of the government as it currently exists and the state as it currently exists, and the closer we are to some sort of libertarian society. It sounds maybe that's the path, you know, maybe that's the way we get to a more libertarian society. Maybe it's not the democratic route, or maybe that turns into the democratic route as more people are awakened. I suppose a fear that I would have, or the reason I'm not eager to just jump wholeheartedly into that viewpoint, is because what we're seeing is the collapse keeps happening. Like there continue to be collapse events. I think the response to COVID was one of them. You know, the billions and billions of dollars just shelled out to corporations and welfare and wasted, and bureaucrats and the rest of it to completely shut down the economy, the pain of which we're only feeling now, with inflation that's, you know, completely rampant, and the cost of living completely rampant. The fact that the government fucked up so monumentally there, and did so, you know, despite hundreds of warnings from every libertarian or you know, sound economist that there was, that should be enough to cause some level of collapse. And yet, you know, the propaganda machine continues, and it's blamed on this, that, and the other. It's blamed on Russia, and it's blamed on, you know, I don't know, everything other than the fact that the government is a parasitic, self-serving piece of shit organization that stole everyone's money and now everyone's poor. The fact that that's not enough to cause the collapse suggests that maybe what is the point? Maybe there is no point. Maybe they can spin the propaganda regardless of anything that happens, any level of collapse. Maybe, you know, at the end of the day, people feel when they lose money, feel when they get poorer, they feel that they're being robbed somehow. But when the correct conclusion is difficult to arrive to for just the everyday person who doesn't have a foundation in the ideas of libertarianism, then maybe we don't ever get to the kind of collapse that we want. Maybe it's just a slow grind further and further into poverty, and totalitarianism. Like, you know, the state just manages to clamp down more control. So I don't know. Do you think that's a possibility? Do you think that there's, or do you have some sort of hopeful retort to that?
No, I think the suggestion you pose is a definite possibility, and it will continue. as long as people who are driven by fear are manipulated to act not in their best self-interest, it'll continue to go. And I think this is a significant difference in first principles that libertarians live by, is that I think through the last 3-4 years, most of us were not scared to the same degree that the average person in the population was. Some would have complied with certain elements to get through it. I think most libertarians would have been the least compliant. But the issue that you highlight, that it continues to be a slow grind, will only happen so long as the people broadly are susceptible to that fear. So if we can continue to push a message of hope, and with MLCs elected in the 2 most popular states in Victoria, we have a platform to deliver this hope. And in future elections, I can forecast that we will continue to get more elected, giving us a greater platform, and the snowball effect will hopefully result in one where people are less fearful and take greater control of their lives, meaning they will not require so much interference or support from the state. And it'll be a simple economic assessment where, as people reduce their reliance upon the state and increase their questioning of how the state functions, I think you'll see a gradual transition where the status quo shifts towards a more libertarian position, one such that it'll be in steps. So we'll get 1 or 2 elected to federal parliaments, add a couple more to state parliaments, and then maybe in 20 years we'll potentially get balance of power. Might have balance of power in 10 years. But I think it's just that positive vision for the future. If we can continue to push that, we'll deliver something that appeals to the average person in a way that they can digest.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there, and I think we had John Ruddick, who's the newly elected New South Wales MLC, on the show, and we talked a little bit at length about the role of elected members from the Liberal Democrats, now the Libertarian Party, and what they can actually kind of achieve in Parliament. Because, as you said, the balance of power is a tenuous goal at best, because you might have it one election cycle by chance and then you don't have it the next one. Like it's not necessarily a good indicator of whether we're succeeding or not, whether we have the balance of power or not. We could have had the balance of power here in Victoria at the last election cycle merely by the fact that we had 2 members elected, but our voter base was minuscule by comparison. But the role of MPs, and I think John Ruddick is starting in the right direction in New South Wales, and David Limbrick here in Victoria certainly did it during COVID alongside with Tim Quilty, who's since lost his seat, is precisely that, is not to try and make some sort of change in the system, but it's to use that platform to, alert people of our cause and to kind of create a bit of a hub, a bit of a light in the darkness that we can flock around. I mean, you only had to see all the desperate, hopeless people during the vaccine mandate regime who flocked to the Liberal Democrats because, here was this group within the state's apparatus system, which is granted all this legitimacy and all this importance, who was speaking against it. And there's something terribly attractive about that, much more attractive than Joe Blow down the street agreeing with you, is someone who is given this purported position of power. So that's I think that's their role, and I think that's the only function that they can realistically make a a comparatively big difference through the democratic system currently.
Yes. And I would just like to touch on that topic with elected members having that platform. What I've found, even though it's just a council position, is that philosophically, I'll put forward arguments on certain topics, but often it's only in hindsight when it's enacted and the concerns I've raised become an actual issue, is that what we stand for and the positions we'll support are critical. But it's only when the shit hits the fan and we've already had our say, identifying that was going to happen, do people start to listen to us. Because before then, often we're discounted.
And hopefully they do listen to us afterwards. Sometimes the case, as we said before, is that they, we've been right on everything for all time, and still the propaganda machine churns on, and we get told that there's a million other causes for the horrors that are being enacted by powers that be.
Yeah.
I did want to ask. So you sounded probably more hopeful about council than I would expect, because councils typically, certainly here in Victoria, I'd imagine pretty similar around the state, are kind of this weird little situation where they tend to be monopolized by an absolute majority of woke, lefty leaning, bleeding heart, economically ignorant people who just want to do things because they advocate for things that feel good, that to advocate for.
Because feelings matter more than facts, don't they?
And money. Feelings matter way more than money, apparently. Because anyway, so what's your experience in council been in? What is that your experience in council, that it is filled with these sorts of people?
Absolutely,
and it is,
without a doubt. But it stems from a concept that Milton Friedman put forward about how money is spent. You might be familiar with this, some of the viewers might not be, but money can be spent in one of four ways. Your money, someone else's money, spent on yourself or spent on others. When it's your money spent on yourself, you both seek to spend the least amount and get the highest value. Your money on someone else, least amount, value, not so much importance. Someone else's money on yourself, the total amount doesn't matter, but you seek to spend the highest value. But when it comes to someone else's money spent on someone else, which is the way governments spend money, you neither seek to spend the least amount nor get the highest value. And that is one of the key factors to understanding how governments perform so poorly, because they are spending too much and are not getting good value for money from that spend.
Yeah, I think that's a great. I love that that little example by Milton Friedman, and I think it's a great entry point explanation for people who don't necessarily think about spending or government or libertarianism or anything. That might be one of the best sort of campaign trail ways of explaining it, because it's so immediately evident that when you're not accountable to either the amount of money being spent or the value that you get out of it, why should you care? Like, you can't force yourself to care about something that you are not accountable for.
Yeah.
And in fact, then what happens is that there's very perverse incentives, is that you start caring about just trying to spend money to make yourself look good, or make yourself feel good, or win the next election because you've made a name for yourself for doing something that actually has helped no one and has lost value. So would you say that's the prevailing instinct within councils and how they spend money?
Yeah, but you've got another element to politics at every level, is that you've got the public servants who largely drive the organisations. You might think that the elected representatives do, but but the size and complexity of governments mean that no elected representative can have their finger on the pulse on absolutely everything and just focus on what's in their portfolio or factor of their control. And as a result, as you've highlighted, like a lot of people will get elected and touch the feel button, like make sure everyone like has a positive feeling about them. But most people won't focus on how they are voting or what they're supporting. And then you've got the public service, that there's really good public servants who bend to the will of the elected representatives. And if, as you highlight, that the lefty woke progressives have got the majority hold of these elected bodies, they'll propose ideas that are going to get support from that cohort. So even though I dislike what a lot of public servants do, I think they are doing a good job in bending to the will of the elected representatives. And it's incumbent on us, who are from a certain group in society. So I break society down into three groups of people: those who want to be left alone, which I think are the clear majority.
The clear majority, sorry.
I think those who want to be left alone are the clear majority.
Yeah.
Those that want to be controlled and those that want to control others form a small minority, but are very vocal. And because of the nature of those three cohorts of people, the ones that just want to be left alone typically don't get involved in politics. I think it's too confusing, or for whatever reason choose not to get involved, which I think disproportionately highlights the percentage of the community that either want to be controlled or governed harder, or want to control others. And due to the nature of human behaviour wanting to be part of the popular team, I think a lot of people that want to be left alone are captivated by that minority to vote or support ideas that give them a happy short-term feeling, giving them that dopamine hit that results in public policy outcomes that don't leave them alone.
That's a really interesting way to break things down, because it kind of summarizes into just like a little nugget of information. What we're essentially gambling on is we're gambling on that idea that of those three groups, the most populous is the ones who want to be left alone, but are currently, due to a variety of reasons, not engaged enough to make the decision that will best leave them alone.
Yeah.
Because I think I hope you're correct, but I don't necessarily think that's a given that that's the biggest group. We're gambling on that. Certainly, we're gambling that there is a sizable number of people who, if we could just reach their ears with our message, would understand. Oh, yes, of course, that philosophy there makes sense. The idea of being left alone and not having to contribute to this collectivism induced state. But I don't know that that's necessarily the majority. And I think to harken back to the COVID example, I think we saw just how many people, through fear, through the free paycheck, through getting to stay home for a couple of months without having to leave the house, were more than happy to be controlled. We're not just, people who want to be left alone who happen to agree with this one. Like, they were, control was fine, feed me and clothe me and you can control me all you like. Yeah. Which is, was hard to see and hard to see how prevalent that was, and kind of alarming for I think Australia on the whole. Other countries less so, but Australia on the whole, I thought that was kind of alarming. So I don't know that that's necessarily the majority of the people who want to be left alone. I certainly think it's a sizable chunk regardless, which is good, a much bigger chunk than what we're currently reaching now. But that is, I suppose, the crux of what we're gambling on. But so I suppose your contention is that at the moment, the people who, regardless of exactly how many people want to be left alone, the ones who want to control are vastly overrepresented in council.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I think it's due to, in part, the fact that those who want to be left alone typically don't get involved. And those that want to be controlled, or those who want to control, are very, very active and organised and involved. Which results in certain outcomes. And at council, you've got an interesting situation where councils absorb about $11 billion per annum out of the Victorian economy, spend it very, very poorly. But because of the influence that council has on most people, I don't think that most people give enough attention to who they're voting for. And it results in, like, you read through the blurbs and someone's talking about the feel-good stuff. They're like, oh, yeah, that sounds good. You go that way. And I've got similar concerns for state and federal, but I think that most people would pay a little bit more attention to state or federal elections than they would council. And yeah, the end result is what we see.
Yeah, I think absolutely people tend to pay more attention to the federal and state, and it's almost, I think it undermines the idea of democracy on the whole, because democracy assumes, if we assume that it is a moral and ethical system, that it's educated and engaged people who are using their vote to make the decision for what is best for the population. Yeah. And when you have federal, state, council elections, all with so much obfuscation of the truth and, promises and lies and all this fanfare that goes on around at election time, it's not just difficult, it is impossible to be well informed unless you just pick a side and run with it, or unless you're a libertarian. Which,
well, I would even challenge that it's difficult for libertarians, because
yes,
if you want to take matters into your own hands, and in upper houses, whether they be legislative councils or the Senate, and control your vote by numbering a lot of boxes below the line, to know the history and the background and what a particular party is going to do is very, very challenging, even for people like you and I who are highly politically active and involved. That for Joe Public, I think it's just about impossible for them to make a truly informed decision. And then you add in compulsory voting on top of that, which libertarians strongly oppose. You get people forced into doing things that I don't know how many times I've lost count of the amount of people that discount what we're doing at election booths and are going in to vote for whoever their mum or dad says so. That we got a very challenging environment that I don't think supports a fully informed vote being cast.
Yes, which plays perfectly into the hands of, the lowest common denominator reasons to vote for anyone.
Yeah.
We are close to the hour mark. I did still want to ask you something about council. So given that you are surrounded by these people with horrific opinions, I'm assuming some of them are nice people, I would imagine.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, I think that they have a genuine belief that what they are doing is for the benefit of the community, but they don't understand the trade-offs associated with these decisions.
Yes, unfortunately, I think that apart from some of the sort of higher ups, even in like the Labour Party, for example, I think many of the foot soldiers think they're saving the world, unfortunately, because then they can fully conscientiously rob everyone of everything, thinking that they're the good guys and thinking that the solution is simple while enacting extreme amounts of harm. But my point was that I think some of them must be nice people underneath it all, especially if they're willing to try and fix the world in some way. But given that they have such horrific opinions, and given that I would imagine you have a lot of dissatisfaction, let's put it that way. In working in council, how do you maintain some level of sanity working in that environment that is so hostile to your views?
There's a number of philosophies that I live by personally. One is focus on what's in your control, and that allows me to have little to no anxiety because I just look at what's in front of me, look at what's within my scope of influence, and focus on that. If not you, then who? If not now, then when? If I can do it, and if I can do it now, I will do. And if I can't, I'll put it on the back burner, and I won't lose. Well, I'll try not to lose too much sleep over it. And doing the best with what you know at the time. There's always the value of hindsight, and you can critique yourself till the cows come home. But if you do the best with what you know at that point in time, that's all you can ask. Asking any more is an impossibility. So, yeah, between those three elements, it is a challenge because I don't see public policy shifting in a way that I would like. But what it does give me is that public platform to have my say and build up the supporter network that in time, I think, will lead to better electoral outcomes that are more libertarian. Now, like I've got no colleagues on council that are libertarian, but there's some that are more closely aligned than others. And I'll take the support where I can. Often, I would probably say 85 to 90% of decisions in council I will oppose singularly, but sometimes I'll get one or two support me in opposing the direction of council. And even though the direction of the ship might not be changing, what I am finding is that I'm getting a lot more support within the public because you've got a situation where historically councils only used to get maybe 5, 6 people attend. Now the gallery is filling with 20 to 30 to 40. And I'm starting to get some hears after I've finished speaking. And often that doesn't happen with the lefty cohort. So, yeah, it's all about the long game. Like for me, whether it's what's happening in my personal life, business, political, I don't sweat over the short-term losses. What I look at is the long-term. I won't say win, but the war we're in. We're going to suffer casualties. We're going to make some have some losses. But if we can focus on the long game and slowly but surely build up our supporter base, we are going to have some significant wins in the medium to distant future, while picking up some good wins here and there in the short term.
Yeah, and I mean, as nice as the short-term wins are, like for example, Ruddock winning in New South Wales recently, there is something satisfying and virtuous about, fighting on the losing side, not because you're likely to win, but because it's right. I think it's probably something that whether it resounds with libertarians instinctively or not, that they're going to have to find a way to make it resound with them, because there's a lot more losing to come before we start winning this thing.
Yes.
We are over time now. Is there any last thoughts and messages you'd like to leave our viewers with before we go?
Obviously, anyone listening is libertarian inclined or full-blown libertarian. And what I would ask you is to do whatever you can. We are a small cohort of the community. I think there's a lot of people that want to support us but don't know about us. And if we can get every libertarian or libertarian sympathetic person active, involved, engaged, whether it's with Students for Liberty, with the Libertarian Party, or Australian Taxpayers Alliance, or any associated entity, manning the phones, doing email campaigns, there's a bunch of things that we can do to be engaging with the community. And if you're not involved, but you're supporting through your vote, happy days. But if you can lift a finger, if you can attend a meeting, if you can man a stall at a community event, the more touch points we have with the broader community, the quicker and stronger we'll build our supporter base. Quicker we build our supporter base, and the stronger we are, the more effective we'll be at elections, and the rest will write itself.
And one other thing you can do is you can subscribe to Collectivitis on YouTube.
Yes.
That was a good segue, wasn't it? You can follow us on Instagram, and you can what else do we have? Subscribe to us on Spotify. That's that's how you can follow us, and obviously we are very much in favor of libertarianism, and therefore we are very much in favor of the newly named Libertarian Party. Thank you so much for your time, Paul. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did, and I'm sure we'll catch up with you again at some other point in the future.
Thank you, Pietro, and we'll see you and Max another time.
Sounds good. All right. Catch you later.